Marcus Chen pushed his cleaning cart through the lower corridors of Orbital Station Verith 9, the same way he had done for 11 years now, and the wheels squeaked against the metal floor in a rhythm he knew better than his own heartbeat. Nobody ever came down here to the maintenance levels where the air recyclers hummed and the pipes groaned with the weight of keeping 10,000 beings alive. And that was exactly how Marcus liked it up above on the shining diplomatic decks. Ambassadors from 3 galactic powers argued about territory and trade routes and ancient grudges that stretched back before humanity had even discovered fire. But down here, there was only the honest work of keeping things clean and functional. Marcus was 47 years old, with gray starting to show at his temples and calluses on his hands from years of scrubbing and fixing and maintaining. And he had made peace long ago with the fact that nobody would ever write songs about a janitor from Earth. The station existed as neutral ground in a galaxy that seemed to have very little neutrality left. And 3 great powers held their endless negotiations here, while their warships waited just outside the boundary zone. The Lanthi Ascendancy controlled the inner systems closest to the galactic core, and they were tall and feline with silver fur and eyes that contained actual stars. And it was said that their ruling families could read minds and shatter thoughts with a glance. The Kathrani Dominion held the outer reaches where the richest mineral deposits lay, and they were reptilian and armored and brutal in ways that made even other predator species nervous. And they believed that strength was the only law that mattered. And then there was the Consortium of Free Worlds, a loose alliance of smaller species that existed in the space between the 2 giants, surviving through trade and diplomacy, and the simple fact that neither great power wanted to start a war over scraps. Earth belonged to the Consortium, though humanity was still considered a minor species that had only achieved faster than light travel 3 centuries ago. And most of the galaxy looked at humans the way humans might look at a clever pet that had learned an interesting trick. Marcus did not think about politics very often because politics had never done anything for him, and he found more satisfaction in a properly cleaned corridor than in all the speeches and treaties that the beings above him spent their days arguing about. He was cleaning a section of tunnel beneath the ambassadorial wing when he heard something that made him stop and hold his breath. It was a sound like crying, thin and warbling and desperate in a way that needed no translation. And his implant could not identify the language, but his heart recognized the meaning immediately. Something was hurt and something was afraid and something was calling out for help in the darkness. Marcus left his cart and followed the sound through a ruptured ventilation grate that he made a mental note to report, and he crawled through a space barely wide enough for his shoulders. And the crying grew louder with every meter he traveled. He found her wedged behind a collapsed support strut in a section of tunnel that had clearly been damaged and forgotten. And at first he thought she was some kind of cat because she had fur and pointed ears and a tail that curled around her shivering body, but then he saw her eyes. And even though she was young and small and clearly terrified, those eyes contained swirling galaxies of bioluminescent light that marked her as something far more than any Earth animal. She was Volanthi, and she was a kit no larger than a house cat, and her silver white fur was matted with coolant fluid that had leaked from a broken pipe above her. And Marcus could see that she was shaking in a way that his basic xenobiology training told him was very, very bad. The Volanthi needed precise temperatures to survive, and this tunnel was cold enough that Marcus could see his own breath. And he did not know how long she had been here, but he knew it had been too long. He did not think about the fact that touching Volanthi royalty was probably a crime punishable by death. And he did not think about the fact that he had no idea how to care for an alien species he had only ever seen from a distance. And he did not think about anything except the fact that this was a baby who was dying, and he could not walk away. Marcus pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her carefully. And she made a sound that was half whimper and half purr. And her tiny claws gripped the fabric like she was holding onto life itself. "It is okay, little one," he whispered as he lifted her against his chest. "I have got you now, and I am not going to let anything happen to you." He carried her back through the ventilation shaft and loaded her into his cleaning cart, hiding her beneath a pile of sanitized towels. And he pushed the cart toward his quarters as fast as he could without drawing attention. His room was small and cramped and nothing special. Just a bed and a desk and a tiny bathroom that he shared with 3 other maintenance workers. But it was warm and it was safe. And right now, that was all that mattered. Marcus laid the kid on his bed and turned up the heating as high as it would go. And he pulled out the emergency thermal blanket he kept in his locker for the nights when the station's heating systems failed. And he wrapped her in layers of warmth until she stopped shivering. He did not sleep that night. And instead he sat beside her and watched the rise and fall of her tiny chest. And he searched every database he could access for information about Volanti biology and nutritional requirements. By morning, she was breathing easier, and her eyes had stopped flickering with that terrified, desperate light. And when Marcus offered her a paste he had synthesized from 17 different nutritional databases, she ate it hungrily and then curled up against his chest and fell asleep. He named her Mira, after his grandmother, who had died when he was young, but who he still remembered as the kindest person he had ever known. And he promised the sleeping kit that he would keep her safe no matter what. Marcus Chun had no idea that he had just changed the course of galactic history, and he would not have believed it if someone had told him, because he was just a janitor who had found a scared baby in a cold tunnel. But the galaxy has strange ways of remembering kindness, and sometimes the smallest actions create the largest waves. And a man who asked for nothing would soon be offered everything. For now, though, Marcus simply held Myra close and listened to her purr, and he thought about nothing except keeping one small life warm and safe and loved. For 3 days, Marcus kept Myra alive through a combination of desperate research and stubborn human refusal to give up on anything that needed him. He learned that Volanti kits required a body temperature of exactly 38.4 degrees to thrive, and he built a heating lamp from maintenance supplies that he borrowed without asking, and promised himself he would return when this was over. He learned that their digestive systems could only process certain proteins in certain combinations, and he spent hours synthesizing a nutrient paste that she would actually eat, failing 17 times before he got the formula right. He learned that Volanti young were born deaf to the psychic network that connected their species, and that they remained vulnerable and silent for the first years of their lives, and that this was why they were considered sacred beyond measure by their people. But mostly he learned that Mira liked to sleep curled against his chest, where she could feel his heartbeat, and that she purred in a subsonic frequency that he felt more than heard, and that when she looked at him with those galaxy-filled eyes, he would have fought the entire universe to protect her. He went to work each day and left her hidden in his quarters with food and water and warmth. And each evening he rushed back to find her waiting by the door with her tail held high and her small voice calling out in greeting. On the 4th day, the station went into lockdown, and Marcus felt his blood run cold. The announcement came over every speaker and every screen at once. A Volanti flagship had arrived unannounced, the largest vessel anyone on the station had ever seen. And the High Matriarch herself had come aboard. The High Matriarch was the supreme ruler of the Volanti ascendancy, and she had not left her home system in over a century. And her psychic presence was so powerful that simply being near her could overwhelm unprepared minds. Half the station's population collapsed with sudden migraines as her ship docked, And Marcus found himself gripping the wall of his quarters as a pressure built behind his eyes, like a storm trying to break through his skull. But then it passed, and he could breathe again. And Mira pressed herself against his legs and made a sound that seemed almost reassuring. He was sitting on his bed with the kitten in his lap when the knock came at his door. Not a harsh demand, but a gentle request. And Marcus knew with absolute certainty that his life was about to change forever. He opened the door and had to tilt his head back to see her. Face the High Matriarch stood 7 feet tall with fur the color of deep space itself. Black so complete that it seemed to absorb the light around her. And her eyes did not merely contain stars, but actual constellations that shifted and moved as she looked at him. Behind her stood 12 warriors in armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal, each of them carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. And Marcus knew that any one of them could have killed everyone on the station without breaking stride. He held Myra against his chest and felt her tiny heart beating fast. And he thought about running, but knew there was nowhere to go. And he thought about begging, but knew that would not save him. And so instead he simply spoke the truth. "She has been eating well," Marcus said. And his voice came out surprisingly steady. "I was not sure about the protein ratios at first, but I think I got them right because she seems stronger now." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the blood pumping in his own ears. Hear the blood pumping in his own ears. High Matriarch's voice did not enter through his ears at all, but appeared directly in his mind. And it was vast and ancient, and carried the weight of 1,000 generations. "You are not afraid?" Marcus considered this, and decided it was not quite accurate. "I am terrified," he admitted. "But she needed help, and I helped her, and I would do it again even knowing you would come for me. She is my granddaughter, 3rd in line to the Ascendancy throne. And she was taken by Kethrani assassins who intended to ransom her for territorial concessions in the outer systems." Marcus felt his grip tighten on Myra as the words sank. And they disposed of her when pursuit grew too close, leaving her to die in a maintenance tunnel rather than be caught with evidence of their crime. And they assumed that no one would find her in time. "I am sorry that happened to her," Marcus said. And he meant it with every part of his being. A human janitor saved the life of Volanti royalty, asking nothing in return, expecting nothing but death for his trouble. The High Matriarch studied him with those star-filled eyes, and Marcus felt as though every part of him was being read like a book. Every memory examined and every motivation weighed. He did not try to hide anything because he had nothing to hide. And he simply stood there and let her see whatever she needed to see. Then, the High Matriarch did something that her guards had never witnessed in 200 years of service. She lowered her head in a bow of respect. "You have created a debt that cannot be repaid. Human, and by our oldest laws, you are now kin of action to the Volanti people, bonded to us by a deed that transcends politics and power and the petty concerns of empires." Marcus blinked and tried to process what he was hearing. "What you have given, we shall return 1,000-fold, and from this day forward, the resources of the Ascendancy are yours to call upon." Marcus stood in the doorway of his tiny maintenance worker quarters, holding an alien princess against his chest, facing the most powerful being in half the galaxy. And his mind went completely blank. "Could you maybe just fix the heating in my quarters?" he finally managed. "It has been broken for 6 months, and I keep submitting maintenance requests, but nobody ever comes." The High Matriarch made a sound that might have been surprise or might have been amusement, and the stars in her eyes seemed to dance. "You could ask for worlds, and you ask for heating. She gets cold at night," Marcus said, looking down at Mira. "And I worry about her." The High Matriarch reached out one long-fingered hand and touched Mira gently on the head. And the kit made a sound of pure joy and pressed into the contact. "You will have your heating, kin of action, and you will have much more besides." Whether you wish it or not, she turned to leave, and her guards parted before her like water around a stone. The Volanthi do not forget their debts, and we do not do things by half measures. And you will learn what it means to be loved by an Empire. Marcus watched her go, and then looked down at Mira, who was purring against his chest as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Well, little one, he whispered, I think our lives just got a lot more complicated. He had no idea how right he was. The Volanthi were true to their word in ways that Marcus found both touching and deeply uncomfortable with. In a week of the High Matriarch's visit, he had been reassigned from sanitation to the ambassadorial staff, and his new title was something called Cultural Liaison of Sacred Debt, which apparently had not existed for 3,000 years. His new quarters were larger than any home he had ever lived in, with actual windows that looked out at the stars instead of metal walls. And the heating worked perfectly at all times, without exception. But Marcus did not care about the quarters or the title or the fact that beings who had ignored him for 11 years now bowed when he passed in the corridors. He cared about the fact that Mira refused to leave him, following him everywhere like a silver shadow with galaxy eyes. And he cared about the fact that the psychic bond she had formed during those 3 desperate days had imprinted deeper than anyone had expected where Marcus went. The third heir to the Volanthi ascendancy followed, and the galaxy took notice. He attended sessions of the Galactic Concord now, sitting silently beside the Volanthi delegation, while representatives of 100 species discussed matters of war and peace and trade. And he understood perhaps 1 word in 10, but he sat there anyway, because Mira wanted to be near him and he wanted to be near her. The Kethrani delegation pretended not to stare, but their scales would flush with colors that Marcus had learned meant anger and fear and frustration, because the evidence of their failed assassination had not stayed secret for long. 3 border systems that had been contested between the Consortium and the Key Dominion for centuries suddenly had their disputes resolved, and in every case the resolution favored the Consortium of Free Worlds. Coincidence? The Kethrani ambassador insisted, but his scales had gone pale, and his voice had lost its usual thunder. The Volanthi said nothing, but their silence spoke volumes. Director of Concord was Earth's representative to the Galactic Concord, a woman who had spent 15 years fighting for scraps of recognition from species that viewed humanity as barely worth noticing. And suddenly she found herself being consulted by the Volanthi delegation on matters of trade and policy. The reasoning was simple and inescapable. Marcus was human. Marcus was kin of action. Therefore, human perspectives deserved consideration and respect. This is absurd, Director Okonkwo told Marcus one evening as they shared a meal in his new quarters. The entire balance of power in this sector is shifting because you found a cat in a tunnel. She is not a cat, Marcus said, watching Myra chase a ball of crumpled maintenance reports across the floor. She's a person who happens to look like a cat. You know what I mean? I do, and I do not have an answer for you. And I am just as confused by all of this as you are. Myra caught the paper ball and brought it back to Marcus, dropping it at his feet and looking up at him with an expression of pure expectation. And he threw it again because how could he not? The Volanthi are not doing this for politics, Director Okonkwo said slowly, watching the interaction. Are they? No, Marcus agreed. They are doing it because they believe I saved something precious, and they want to repay that debt. And you really did not know who she was when you saved her. I did not know anything, except that she was cold and scared and alone. And I could not walk away from that. Director Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. And when she spoke again, her voice was softer than before. That is exactly what makes this so powerful, you know. The fact that you would have done the same thing if she had been anyone at all. Marcus shrugged because he did not know how to respond to that. And Mira returned with the paper ball again, and he threw it again, and the game continued. She was growing quickly now, already twice the size she had been when he found her, and her eyes were beginning to show the first faint stirrings of stars rather than just swirling galaxies. The Lanthi healers said she would begin developing her psychic abilities within the year, and that the bond between them would change but not weaken, and that Marcus would always be able to feel her emotions brushing against his mind. He already could. Sometimes, late at night when she curled up beside him and purred herself to sleep, not words. Never words, but warmth and safety and a love so pure it made his chest ache. "You have changed everything," Director Okonkwo said, standing to leave. "I hope you understand that." "I did not mean to change anything," Marcus replied. "That is exactly what I mean." She left him alone with Myra and the paper ball and the weight of expectations he had never asked for. He thought about his life before all of this. The quiet corridors and the simple work and the peace of being invisible. And he wondered if he would ever have that again. But then Mira jumped into his lap and pressed her head against his chest. And he felt the echo of her emotions wrapping around him like a warm blanket. And he decided that some things were worth any price. "I do not know what I am doing, little one," he whispered into her fur. "I am just a janitor who got lucky," she purred in response. A sound that vibrated through his bones and filled him with a calm he could not explain. "But I will figure it out," he promised. "For you, I will figure it out." Outside his window, the stars turned in their endless dance, and somewhere in the depths of space, the Gethrani Dominion was making plans that would soon test that promise to its breaking point. The galaxy was changing, shifting around the axis of one man's simple kindness. And the beings who had built their power on cruelty and fear were beginning to realize that something new was rising, something they had no defense against, something that looked like love. The Kethrani Dominion did not accept their diminishing position gracefully. And 3 suns after Myra's rescue, they made their move with the kind of brutal efficiency that had made them feared across half the galaxy. The attacks came without warning on 12 Consortium worlds simultaneously, fleets appearing from hyperspace with weapons already firing. And by the time the distress signals reached the nearest Allied stations, it was already too late for thousands upon thousands of innocent beings. The first world to fall was a human colony called New Shandong, and the Kethrani bombardment killed 40,000 people in the opening minutes before the ground forces even began there. Descent Marcus watched the reports come in on the screens in the ambassadorial wing with Myra, pressed tight against his side, and he felt her emotions flooding through their bond like a river of shared grief, horror, and sorrow, and a rage that surprised him with its intensity. Because Mira had never felt rage before, and the sensation was strange coming from such a gentle soul. The Lanthi High Council convened an emergency session, and Marcus was permitted to attend because his status as kin of action gave him access that would have been unthinkable for any other human. He sat in the gallery and listened as the most powerful Valanthi in existence debated what to do about a war that was not technically their concern. The Dominion has not attacked Valanthi territory, one counselor argued, his fur rippling with colors that indicated cautious calculation. And we have no formal treaty with the consortium that would obligate us to intervene. The kin bond creates an obligation that transcends treaties, another counselor replied. But the scope of that obligation is not clearly defined in our laws. If we intervene in every conflict that touches a kin-bonded species, we will be at war forever. If we do nothing while the Dominion slaughters innocents, what does our honor mean? The debate continued for hours, voices rising and falling in patterns that Marcus could not follow. And through it all, the High Matriarch sat in silence with her star-filled eyes, revealing nothing of her thoughts. Finally, there was a pause in the arguments, and Marcus found himself standing without consciously deciding to do so. Every eye in the chamber turned to him, and he felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure. But he had faced the High Matriarch herself and survived. And after that, nothing else seemed quite as terrifying. "I would like to speak," he said, and his voice carried clearly through the silent room. "If I am permitted." The High Matriarch inclined her head in a gesture that meant assent, and Marcus walked to the speaking platform on legs that felt steadier than he had expected. Did not have a speech prepared because he had not known he would do this, and so he simply spoke the truth that was burning in his heart. "I want to tell you about New Shandong," he began, "because I think you need to understand what was lost today." He told them about the colony's founding by refugees from Earth climate wars, families who had lost everything and traveled across the stars to build something new in a place where their children might have a chance to thrive. He told them about the terraced farms they had built in the mountain slopes that reminded them of the homes they had left behind, and about the festivals they held each year where children released paper lanterns into the sky to honor their ancestors. He told them about a woman named Li Wei who he had trained with during his first year on Vareth 9. A maintenance worker like him who had dreamed of something more, who had returned to New Shandong to raise her family near the mountain she loved. "She sent me a message 2 weeks ago," Marcus said, and his voice cracked, but he kept going. Her daughter had been accepted to the colony's engineering academy, and she was so proud she could barely contain herself. He paused and felt Myra's emotions supporting him through their bond, giving him strength to continue. "I do not know if Li Wei is alive or dead right now, and I do not know if her daughter made it to shelter in time. I do not know if the mountains are still standing or if the farms are burning." He looked around the chamber at the alien faces watching him, and he saw something in their star-filled eyes that might have been understanding. "I am not asking you to save us because of me," he said, "and I'm not asking you to save us because of some ancient law or political calculation. I'm asking you to save us because 40,000 people just died for the crime of existing near a political inconvenience. And if you do not act, it will happen again and again until there is no one left to save." He took a breath and felt the words rising up from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "When I found Myra in that tunnel, I did not help her because she was important, and I did not help her because I thought I would be rewarded, and I did not help her because anyone was watching. I helped her because she was alive and she was hurting, and I could do something about it." He spread his hands in a gesture that felt inadequate to express what he was trying to say. "I think that is all any of us can do in the end. Just notice who's hurting and do something about it. The people of New Shandong are hurting right now, and you can do something about it. And I am asking you to choose compassion over caution." The silence that followed his words stretched for what felt like eternity. And then the High Matriarch rose from her throne. "The kin of action has spoken." Her voice echoed in every mind in the chamber. "And he has reminded us of truths we had allowed ourselves to forget. The ascendancy has held itself apart for too long, believing that our gifts made us different, superior, above the concerns of lesser beings. But there are no lesser beings. There are only beings who are hurting, and beings who can help. The Volanti will honor their debts." She turned to face the council with stars blazing in her eyes. "All of them, prepare the war fleet." The Volanti war fleet was not the largest in the galaxy, but it was something far more terrifying than mere size could convey. Ships that moved through space like thoughts given form, appearing and disappearing according to psychic geometries that no other species could perceive or predict, and weapons that did not destroy matter so much as convince it that it had never existed in the first place. The ascendancy had remained neutral for millennia because they had never needed to prove themselves to anyone, and the rest of the galaxy had been content to leave them alone. rather than discover what would happen if they were ever truly provoked the Kithrani. Dominion was about to learn. The first engagement happened in the Corridor of Stars, a region of space where the Dominion had been hunting refugee convoys fleeing from their conquered worlds, and the Kithrani admiral commanding the hunter fleet had been confident in his overwhelming numerical advantage. He stopped being confident approximately 3 seconds after the Volanthi arrived ships that should not have been able to move that fast, striking from angles that should not have existed, and weapons that passed through shields as though they were not there at all. The hunter fleet was destroyed in 11 minutes without a single Volanthi casualty, and the refugee convoys were escorted to safety by vessels that seemed to shimmer with starlight. Word spread quickly through the Dominion ranks, and fear began to grow in hearts that had never known anything but conquest. The Volanthi did not fight like other species, did not care about territory or resources or the usual spoils of war, and they could not be predicted or outmaneuvered because they operated on principles that made no sense to military minds. They appeared where they were needed, protected those who could not protect themselves, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The Dominion offensive collapsed within 2 weeks, their carefully coordinated assault falling apart as fleet after fleet was neutralized with surgical precision. And the Kithrani High Command found itself facing an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. But it was what happened after the fighting that truly changed the galaxy. The High Matriarch addressed the Galactic Concord in person, standing before representatives of every known species with Myra at her side. Myra was no longer a kid now, having grown into a young Volanthi with stars burning bright in her eyes and a human name tucked into her heart like the most precious treasure she possessed. For 3,000 years the Ascendancy has held itself apart. The High Matriarch's voice echoed in every mind present. We believed that our gifts made us different, superior, that the affairs of other species were beneath our notice. We were wrong. Turned to look at Marcus, who was standing in the consortium delegation trying very hard not to be noticed. A human janitor taught us what we had forgotten. That compassion is not a weakness to be managed, but a strength to be cultivated. That the measure of a civilization is not its power, but its mercy. That every life matters, even one small life shivering in a cold tunnel. The chamber was completely silent as she continued. The Volanthi Ascendancy formally requests membership in the Consortium of Free Worlds. Gasps echoed from a dozen delegations, because the Ascendancy had never joined anything, had never submitted themselves to any alliance or treaty that might constrain their freedom of action. We will stand with humanity, and we will stand with all who choose kindness over cruelty, who reach out to help instead of harm. This is the debt we owe, and this is the debt we will spend eternity repaying. The consortium accepted, and within a year 6 more independent powers had applied to join an alliance that suddenly seemed like the future rather than a collection of survivors clinging to the margins within. 5 years the Kithrani Dominion itself had fractured, its outer territories defecting to an alliance that offered something the Dominion never had. Hope that there was another way to live. That strength did not have to mean cruelty, that the galaxy could be shaped by love rather than fear. Marcus Chun retired from diplomatic service at 62, not because he was forced out, but because he had never wanted power or influence in the first place. He returned to maintenance work on a small station orbiting Earth, fixing broken systems and cleaning corridors and finding peace in simple tasks that demanded nothing more than honest effort. Myra visited when she could, between her duties as the Ascendancy's ambassador to humanity, and she always brought him tea from whatever world she had just left. They would sit together in his small quarters, not so different from the one where he had first saved her life, and they would talk about her work and his garden and the grandchildren he had with a woman named Sarah, who he had met at a diplomatic function. Sarah had liked him because he was the only person in the room not trying to impress anyone. And they had built a life together that was quiet and ordinary and full of love. Sometimes late at night when Myra was visiting, she would curl up beside him the way she had when she was small and afraid, and Marcus would feel her mind brush against his through the bond that had never faded. Not words but warmth, not language but love, not gratitude but something deeper that transcended all the languages in all the galaxies. The galaxy had changed allegiance because one man had refused to walk past a dying child, and empires had risen and fallen because a janitor had chosen kindness when cruelty would have been easier. History would remember the great battles and the treaties and the political maneuvering that reshaped civilization. But those who knew the truth would remember something simpler. They would remember that it started with a cry in the darkness, and a man who stopped to listen, and a choice that cost nothing but meant everything. Marcus Chun lived to be 93 years old, surrounded by family and love and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. And when he finally passed, peacefully in his sleep with Mira keeping vigil beside him, the entire Velanti ascendancy observed a day of mourning for the human who had taught them how to be kind. It was, as Marcus himself had always believed, exactly the kind of thing that mattered, not power or wealth or the conquest of stars. Just love, just compassion, just the simple, stubborn human refusal to walk away from someone who needed help. The galaxy remembered, and the galaxy was grateful. And the story of the janitor and the princess was told to children across 1,000 worlds for 1,000 years, because some stories are too important to ever be forgotten, and some kindnesses echo forever.